of them all. He brings such joy to church. He really does. I wish I could just skip in here some Sundays. Several weeks ago, if you were here over 3 weeks, there were some cards in your bulletin, and I had asked everyone that was here to answer just a few questions, give us a little bit of information on some topics that we can address in upcoming sermon series. And if you remember, some were about what you worry about, what you wonder about, and what you dream of. And I want to thank everyone so we can use those to make a sermon series in the future. And I cannot tell you how much your input has helped us in that. And it was very evident, believe it or not, which topics that were very common among everyone that filled out these cards, and especially which topics that came to the forefront of your consciousness as well. And trust me, we will cover those that you wrote down in sermon series come, but there was just one topic that just seemed to scream so much louder than any others in those cards, and I felt the need to address it in a message right away, and then we will revisit it later on in a complete sermon series. But right now, I wanted to just address it. And I do want to say that this message is intended for mature audiences only. And that's meaning those of you who are over 60 or around there, I'll let you put yourself in a category. However, if you are 60 years and younger, I would ask that you please pay close attention. Because, number one day you too will be that old or older. And number two, it will help you tremendously understand and have more insight, maybe for your parents or your grandparents, or more importantly, those in our faith community who are of a mature audience. All right. And so what makes me an expert of mature audiences over the age of 60? I will say, I am not. But I have read who I believe is one of the leading experts, for me anyway, someone, although is famous, I believe inspired me in an indirect way to kind of even be a minister and do what I do. Because even at a young age, I would listen attentively to this man's messages and this man's sermons. And I could hear him and see him speak with such passion and wisdom. And his messages always captivated me as even at a young age. And that man is Dr. Reverend Billy Graham. Some of you might have heard of him. But so I turned to him not directly, but 3 years ago, at the young age of 92, Billy Graham wrote a book, I don't know if you've heard it or not, entitled Nearing Home, Life, Faith, and Finishing Well. And in the very first paragraph, Dr. Graham writes, all my life I was taught how to die as a Christian, but no one ever taught me how I ought to live in my later years. Old age has its challenges, and it's not for whims. But God wants us to embrace it as part of His plan for our lives, and to look for the Lord's purpose in every circumstance and in every face and voice we encounter daily. In a sense, we are all nearing home, but we need to learn what it means to grow older with God's help, to grow older with grace, and find the guidance to finish well. Those words just kind of jumped off at me as I enjoyed the book and read the book. And then I noticed, as I was watching football yesterday and through the week, I noticed we're bombarded with advertisements on how to prepare financially for our golden years. But there's not much out there to tell us how we're to prepare spiritually for the final chapters of our life. So today we're going to the Old Testament to hear the words and listen to the words of a wise old man. So if you will, turn to me to Psalm 90 or follow with me on the screen. And what we need to understand as we go through this together, that this psalm was not written by David. That this is the only psalm actually written by Moses. So as we listen, please remember that these are Moses' words, not King David's. And I want you to kind of recall all what has happened to Moses in his lifetime. And we're told that Moses lived to be the young, old age of 120 years old. So these words have been written somewhere, they determined somewhere when Moses was about 85, anywhere between 85 and 120. So if you will, join with me in Psalms number 90, first verse. Moses writes, Lord, you have been our dwelling place throughout all generations. Before the mountain was formed, you brought forth the whole world. From everlasting to everlasting, you are God. Moses begins by recognizing that God was there through it all. Moses was the leader of over 2 million people. And recall the totality of his life. He says, God, you were there. You were the only thing that was consistent my entire life. I mean, that whole basket in the water thing, the whole thing of me growing up in Pharaoh's house, when my anger got the best of me and I killed an Egyptian master, when you talked to me in the burning bush, through all the plagues of Pharaoh, through the Red Sea parting, and for me slamming down and breaking the Ten Commandments, Moses says, through it all, the only thing that has been consistent was you, God. And Moses witnessed a lot of changes in his lifetime. But if you are sitting here this morning and you are over 60 years of age, you have witnessed more change in our world than any other generation in the history of creation. Especially when it comes to technology. I mean, it's a struggle for everyone to even keep up these days. And if you're over 60, you've witnessed change in political correctness. You've witnessed change in the moral compass and in our society rules in which we live. I mean, you've experienced your mind's not working as fast or as efficient as they used to. And that alone can be such a scary and unsettling thing. I mean, changes in mental capacity can be frightening. I mean, just to even say the least. And then there are changes. Then there's changes in the church. I mean, drums and guitars and video screens and a preacher not wearing a tie or a robe. It can be discerning, to even say the least. And the change that we all have to face, as we age, is the simple fact that more of our loved ones and friends die. And when the people that we look for stability to, the people that we look for guidance to, when they're gone, it can make us feel scared and abandoned and feel like an orphan, if you will. I mean, Moses mentions that in verse 3. He says, you turn your people back to dust, saying, return to dust, you mortals. I mean, 1,000 years in your sight is just like, 1,000 years in your sight are like a day that has just gone by, or like a watch in the night. Yet you sweep away people in the sleep of death, and they are like new grass of the morning. And in the morning it springs up new, but by evening it's dry and withered. He reminds us that heading home will make us, or make anyone, feel insecure. I mean, the one thing that is constant and unchanging is God is there. And see, there's security in God. And he notices, God, you are my dwelling place. And with all this change, God is still the same yesterday and today and forever. But we begin to resist change as we grow older, only because it makes us feel insecure. You see, even changes that is positive, we resist. We resist change because we view it as an insult to the way we used to do things. I mean, I can honestly remember a family member who I am going to remain anonymous to protect the redneckest and backwards ways of my extended family. But this person, when they got indoor plumbing, I remember when they got indoor plumbing, this person in my extended family refused to use it and would go to the outhouse because he said, you should not be doing those types of things in the house. I know a brilliant, even today, older lady who refuses to use email. I mean, do you know why children are better at technology these days than adults? One, because it's their language. It's the way they communicate. It's the way they form relationships. They just do that through technology. It's not a sit-down conversation, look in your eyes society that's coming up. And second, it's because they're not afraid to try. I mean, they're not afraid to mess up. They'll push the buttons and try to figure it out. And we're like, no, you can believe everything. They'll try. But this lady is not communicating with her grandchildren because of her inflexibility. It's not because of her mind. Truth is within churches as well. I mean, we can gripe about all the changes, and we can miss out on some very enriching, loving relationships and some awesome worship because we're focused on the change. I mean, I always say, come and wear whatever makes you feel comfortable in the presence of God. And sometimes desired dress is just not practical. I mean, I don't mind wearing a suit and a robe, but it's impractical when I'm playing guitar or sitting on the floor with children. It just is. And I hope and pray that more attention is placed on my words and the things we do and my actions than it is my dress, the way I look. And then there's the music. I mean, C.S. Lewis, one of the most reputable biblical scholars and authors of all time, said church hymns are sixth-rate poems set to fifth-rate music. That's what he said. He said some of the hymns in our hymnals and our child's hymnals are hard to sing. I mean, they just are. And a lot of them are set to old drinking song melodies. And if it wasn't for a metrical index, I mean, we would be all over the place trying to sing some of these things. However, if we're holding out for the song or the type of song that we want to sing, we close our minds and our ears to others. We miss out on the wholeness. We miss out on the spirituality. We miss out on what worship actually is. I mean, it's kind of like saying, look, I'm not going to eat the meatloaf because it's not Granny's meatloaf recipe or the way she used to make it. And that's true. That's true. But it might not be, it might not be Granny's, but you know what? It still may be good eating if we give it an honest, open-minded taste. You know, it may not be Granny's, but you know what? It may become a good substitute. But it is also a two-way street. It's also a two-way street. I mean, there's nothing better. There is nothing better for me, or I believe for a lot of you, to hear those words and that organ and the choir and everyone singing, "It is well, it is well." I love it with my soul. With my soul. There's nothing better than that. I love that. It touches me somewhere deep inside. But so does, dear God, I pour out my heart to say that I love you. One was written years ago. One was written in a couple years that we just sang. Or to hear the words, there's no shadow, dear God, in your presence. There's no place for me to hide. I mean, and here in our worship, we've been kind of flexible with our methods without compromising our biblical and theological principles. I mean, simply put, we don't just sing anything that doesn't reflect of what we believe in God. Our security is not in our dress. Our security is not in the music, but is in the God that we come here each week and worship. But please note, if you turn me off, turn me back on. Because please note, not all changes are positive. not all changes are positive, even within the church. I remember when I was young, the hottest thing around churches, and I don't want to insult anybody if this church had one, I don't know, but the hottest thing for me growing up when I was little in churches was puppet ministry. Everyone had puppet ministry. These people would come from all over. Our church had a puppet ministry. People would come over. I was so dang sick of puppets, I didn't know what to do. But what they forgot to ask was the children. We were scared of the bejeebas of puppets. Some of us still are. Not all change is good or positive. And the younger generation needs to understand that the older generation has seen a lot of good ideas fail miserably. So don't get upset if they don't just jump on the newest idea or get all excited about the newest idea. And you know, not all traditions are bad. I mean, there are some that we need to preserve. Like communion in our worship. I mean, some we need to preserve, like wedding rings, like military salutes. There are many traditions that we need to keep. And so, for a younger generation, please don't discard tradition too quickly. We continue with verse 7. We are consumed by your anger and terrified by your indignation. You have set our iniquities before you, our secret sins in the light of your presence. All our days pass away under your wrath. We finish our years with a moan. Our days may come to 70 years or 80 if our strength endures. Yet the best of them are not troubled in sorrow, for they quickly pass, and we fly away. If only we knew the power of your anger. Your wrath is great as the fear that is your due. Teach us to number our days that we may gain a heart of wisdom. When Moses looks back over his life, he recalls all the wrong things he has done. And he realizes that they are now fixing to be in the light of God's presence. And we all know by reading Exodus, we all know Moses had anger issues. I mean, he killed a guy. I mean, he even busted up the Ten Commandments, just to name a few things that he did without thinking in a rage of anger. And when we begin to head home, we tend to also to look back on our lives and only see the wrong things we've done. We overlook the right and the good things. We just kind of focus on, hyper-focus, if you will, on the bad things we've done. And I've come to accept the fact that I know that I'm going to die a sinner. And that's frightening. It's very frightening. And when we tend to look back on our life and we know that there's this day coming, it's kind of like an IRS audit. You know, as the day gets closer and closer, the fear gets greater and greater. And we look at all the wrong things, and that fear is just way too much. And we think God's never going to let me in. I mean, all these things, there's no way I'm going to get in. And then we hear Moses, and he's like, look, time is running fast. I mean, we're heading home. We're almost there. But in both verses 10 and 12, Moses reminds us that life is brief. I mean, we have an average of 70, 80 years. I mean, you do the math. That's not a long time. And after 70, we begin to battle the physical problems more and more and more. And our bodies just don't work like they used to. And it's painful. And it's frustrating, both physically and emotionally. And Moses said to help us number our days. And he's meaning that each day, dear God, let's not take it for granted. Let's grow in wisdom and help us to realize our mortality so we can make every single day count for something. He continues in verse 13. He says, relent, Lord. How long will it be? Have compassion on your servants. What we need to remember that the Old Testament, the verses leading up to this, the Old Testament is about justice. But Christ made a new commitment. Christ made a new covenant, if you will, between us and God. It's not about justice. I mean, it is, but it's more about mercy and grace and forgiveness. And this gives us the ability to not live the rest of our seasons of our life fearful of God's judgment. You see, I'm not going to live worrying if I did enough. I mean, I'm going to trust. I'm going to choose to trust in God's amazing grace. And I'm not going to fear judgment. I'm going to trust God's promise that He will be with me through it all. Verse 14. Satisfy us in the morning with your unfailing love, that we may sing for joy and be glad all of our days. Make us glad for as many days as you have afflicted us, for as many years as we have seen trouble. He reminds us that older people have experience and knowledge to share with us. Young people don't think that they're out of date and don't have something incredible or intellectual to teach us. I mean, we can all do a better job. We can all learn a little bit more about how to love and respect and cherish one another. So don't turn it out. Moses finishes by this. May your deeds be shown to your servant, your splendor to their children. May the favor of our God rest on us. Establish the work of our hands for us. Yes, establish the work of our hands. Moses is over 85 years old. And his prayer is, establish the work of my hands. It's been ingrained in us, this myth that when we reach 60 or 70 or beyond, our influence is over. I mean, we believe it's time to stop working. We've fed this myth that we believe it's time to release all our responsibilities. We're told this myth that, when we get to 60 or 70, it's time to kind of check out and take life easy. I mean, do we need to change the pace of our lives? Yes, we do. Of course we do. But the Bible and even our society is full of people that God used when they were really, really old. I mean, so unless anyone in here is over 120 years old, you ain't old yet in the eyes of God. You got to get amen on that or something. See, your contribution still matters. I mean, what makes one think that we are to stop Christian service at a certain age? I mean, our next chapter in our life may be the best one yet. So I encourage, I beg, I plead with everyone here to leave a spiritual legacy for your children and your grandchildren. But how do you do that? Write them letters. Sit down in a moment of prayer and quiet and be still and write them letters. Leave it in your will so that they will read it when you're gone. I mean, tell them what is on your heart. That life has clouded up, that you don't have the time or can do it now. I mean, just sit down and leave that for them. Spend more time in prayer for your family and for our faith community. Volunteer. Invite people to join us here. Look, the older you are, the more aggressive you can be in inviting people. Because people will think that's cool. Trust me. You can be pushy if you're over 60. Leave a legacy that lives long after you're gone. Whatever it is. I recall Moses' life, and when Moses' final chapter ends, and why Dr. Graham's book is called Heading Home, or Nearing Home, is Moses begins to head home by climbing a mountain. And he climbs this mountain in preparation to die. And I can imagine as he's climbing this mountain, and he looks around and he can see, because they were there, the Egyptians who built these mighty pyramids to hold their remains. But Moses chose to climb high up a mountain. And Moses calls this climb, if you will, the climb to glory. Climb to glory. And when he reaches the top, he hears the words of a saving God that says, "Good job, faithful servant. You are safely home." Isn't that what each of us long for? Isn't that heading home and finishing well? Will you pray with me?